Section 1. Hey guys! Tonight we're slipping off our sandals and squinting against the desert glare as we step into the slow hum of daily life in ancient Mesopotamia. Yes, that dusty cradle of civilization where everybody's got a clay tablet, nobody has coffee, but somehow they're still taking coffee breaks. Sort of. You find yourself trudging across a baked courtyard in the Sumerian city of Ur sometime around 2100 BCE. The air smells like dust, burnt reeds, and something faintly sweet, probably date syrup. A faint breeze ruffles the edges of your linen tunic. And yes, your supervisor is yelling something about quotas in cuneiform again. You're not entirely sure, but the tone is familiar. Let's be honest, you probably won't survive this shift. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease into the cool shade of a mud brick wall. The sun won't relent for hours, and the clay underfoot radiates the kind of heat that makes you question every decision in your reincarnation cycle. Still, there's a trickle of relief in your mid-morning break. And while there's no espresso machine whirring in the background, the ancient Mesopotamians knew a thing or two about pausing for a drink and a chat. They didn't have coffee, not quite, but they had kvass, a kind of lightly fermented barley beer, served in tall ceramic beakers, sometimes with straws made of gold or reeds to filter out the grainy bits. You lift the vessel and sip. It's warm, nutty, with a murky fizz that tingles the back of your throat, just strong enough to take the edge off the morning's endless accounting of sheep. You're not alone. Around you, other scribes and temple workers huddle in low-voiced groups. Some fan themselves lazily. Others swap gossip about the high priest's new wig or the latest omen from a suspiciously lumpy goat liver. Someone hums a tune that may or may not be the oldest earworm in human history. It's break time, and for these people, that means something social, sacred, and suspiciously inefficient. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian breaks were formally structured or simply informal lulls in work. But cuneiform records from temples and ziggurats do show regular mentions of midday meals, drink offerings, and pauses that interrupt long bouts of administration, pottery, or stargazing. One particularly dry tablet from Lagash mentions an official pause for refreshment, although it also details the precise grain-to-water ratios for the beer, which, let's face it, sounds like something your modern office manager would laminate. A fringe theory, though charming, suggests that certain Mesopotamian temples organized beverage rotations for their workers, where novice priests would be responsible for brewing and distributing kvass at set intervals. While unproven, the idea of ancient baristas in ceremonial skirts, ladling out warm barley brew, is just too good not to imagine. You lean back, letting the sun filter through palm frond latticework above you. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays in protest, possibly over union break rights, though more likely because he's being asked to carry a basket of figs the size of a beanbag chair. To be clear, these breaks weren't just idle pleasure. In Mesopotamian worldview, food and drink were entwined with ritual, status, and even timekeeping. Workers toasted not just each other, but the gods, with libations often poured onto the ground before sipping. It's like your water cooler has been upgraded to a holy shrine. Every gulp of beer a prayer. Every snack, a tribute to a nana's snacky mood. In larger cities like Babylon, break time could involve wandering local markets, picking up roasted chickpeas, honey cakes, or dried dates rolled in sesame. Not bad for a civilization where most homes were one room and plumbing was theoretical. By now, the sun is crawling higher, and your break is technically over, though your supervisor has drifted off to inspect a suspiciously crooked mud brick arch. You take one more sip of your kvass, stretch your back with a satisfying pop, and shuffle reluctantly back to your task. A long afternoon of copying symbols into clay, each stroke echoing a language that won't be read for 3,000 years. But for a moment, in the middle of the world's first cities, you were just another worker enjoying the oldest tradition of all, taking a little time to do absolutely nothing, badly. Section 2. The midday sun over Ur is brutal, an unflinching stare from the gods that even the gods themselves might have found excessive. But you, scribe of moderate standing and questionable posture, are back at your station. The clay tablet before you is slightly cracked, your reed stylus is chewed at one end, bad habit you know, and you're preparing to record the inventory of a goat herd that almost certainly doesn't exist. Still, your thoughts wander. Maybe it's the cast talking, or maybe it's just the sheer dullness of the numbers you're etching, but your mind drifts to a question more ancient than your sandals. Who's really running this place? Because let's face it, while kings and priests pose for statues and the gods get all the temples, it's the scribes like you who keep the gears turning. You're part of a scribal class that wields the mighty power of literacy in a world where most people can't even write their own names. That's right. You, with your ink-stained fingernails and a permanent slouch, are an elite member of society. You could transcribe a treaty, insult someone in 6 different cuneiform variants, or list every ox in a royal caravan with alarming precision. Historians still argue whether scribes were more like bureaucrats or holy intermediaries, since writing was considered semi-magical. Your tools, clay, stylus, and a wet rag were sacred objects. The ability to trap the spoken word in hardened mud? That was power. That was permanence. That was also, apparently, a really good way to get out of hauling bricks. You pause and glance sideways at a younger scribe in training. He's nodding off, his stylus dangling over a half-finished sentence that says something like, 19 goats received from, and then trails off, as if the goats walked away mid-delivery. You consider waking him, then decide against it. You've been there. Of course, the scribal school wasn't exactly nap-friendly. If you rewind your life a decade or two, you'd remember the Adaba, the tablet house, where future scribes were trained. These schools were notorious for their strict discipline and never-ending drills. One surviving student exercise translates roughly to, I wrote my lines, I did not speak, I did not play, my teacher beat me. Charming, really. Like a Mesopotamian Yelp review. Your own teacher was known for 2 things, wearing sandals with very aggressive soles and a fondness for flinging wet clay at inattentive pupils. You still flinch a little when someone raises a hand near a water jug. But despite the bruises, the Adaba gave you more than literacy. It gave you stories, tall tales embedded in mythic epics, riddles etched in tablets, proverbs so old no one really knows what they mean anymore. One line, don't buy a donkey from a whisperer, still confuses you. Was it code for check the warranty? Or some ancient inside joke? As you work, your tablet begins to take shape. The goats, imaginary or not, are accounted for. The correct deity is thanked, and there's even a decorative wedge or 2 at the margin. You're almost proud, until a temple official passes by and casually drops another slab of clay on your pile. This one's damp, heavy, and covered in half-dried fingerprints. Great. Someone's been double-dipping. Still, you allow yourself a small smile. Because being a scribe might mean sore wrists and endless bureaucracy, but it also means you get to see everything. The court orders, the temple gossip, the shipment logs, the love poems hidden at the bottom of ration lists. Sometimes, you even get to draft letters for traveling merchants, long missives comparing fig quality between city-states. One time you ghost wrote a breakup tablet. You made it rhyme. You're proud of that one. And as the sun begins to lower just slightly, casting long shadows from the temple towers, you feel a sense of peace. You are not a warrior. You are not a priest. But in your own quiet way, you're part of the machinery that makes the city hum. So you stretch your back again, roll your shoulders, and press your stylus gently into the clay one more time. 19 goats received from. A pause. Then with a grin. A whisper. Section 3. It's nearing the end of the workday, and you can feel it in your knees. The shadows in UR are growing long, and the walls of the city throw warm, jagged patterns across the street where a procession of donkeys clatters past, their hooves soft against the packed earth. One of them looks at you with what feels like judgment. You ignore him. You've had a long day, and honestly, you don't need criticism from livestock. You finish logging your imaginary goats, handed your tablet to a slightly confused overseer, and now, finally, you're free to meander home through the sticky hum of the city's early evening bustle. The air is thick with smells, dried fish, pressed dates, wet clay, sandalwood, and something yeasty coming from a baker's stall that may or may not have actual flour in it. That's the thing about Mesopotamian cities. They're not picturesque in the classical sense. But they move. They hum and grind and wheeze with life, like a great living kiln fueled by complaints and barley. Your route takes you past the ziggurat, towering above the city like a massive tiered birthday cake that's had a few bites taken out of it. Priests bustle around in their ceremonial fringes, muttering incantations to appease one god or another. You try not to make eye contact. It's been a long day, and if someone asks you to copy a hymn right now, you might snap and write it backwards. Now, your house is small but respectable. A single room, clay brick walls, a modest altar to Nabu, patron god of scribes, of course, and exactly one reed mat that somehow always smells like damp straw and sandal oil. But before you can reach your door, there's a sound. A soft rhythm, almost like a drum but deeper, more patient. You follow it, curious, until you find yourself at the edge of a communal bathhouse, a rare luxury in this neighborhood. Not Roman-style luxurious, mind you. This isn't a marble dome with heated floors and philosophical debates. This is a series of connected mud brick basins filled with tepid water and surrounded by steam, gossip, and the occasional goat. Still, you step inside, because even in ancient Mesopotamia, nothing says, "I'm off the clock," like soaking your feet in community broth. You lower yourself onto a warm stone slab. Nearby, a pot-bellied brewer is explaining, loudly, that his beer is blessed by Enki himself, while two midwives argue over whether second-born children are cursed or merely difficult. You close your eyes and let the steam rise around you, softening the day's grime and responsibilities. Historians still argue whether these early bathhouses were primarily hygienic, social, or spiritual. But what's clear is that they weren't just for the elite. While palace complexes had their own luxury facilities, neighborhood bathhouses were communal spaces where people swapped news, arranged marriages, or just sat in shared silence and pruned. A fringe theory suggests that some of these bathhouses doubled as informal legal courts, where neighborhood disputes were aired and resolved with feet submerged and tempers cooled. There's even one unearthed tablet that reads, "He broke the contract, and I said this while we both sat wet," which, frankly, should be a law to this day. You dip your hand into a basin. The water is tepid, cloudy, scented faintly with lavender and something sharper, maybe crushed onion or juniper. Ancient Mesopotamians loved their aromatics. Perfumes, oils, and balms were signs of status. Yes, but also practical. After all, when your city has one drainage ditch and 40,000 humans, you learn to mask a smell or two. The bath attendant, a young woman with a tired expression and a reed ladle, pours warm water over your shoulders. You nod in thanks. She nods back without smiling, then continues ladling water onto an old man muttering about eclipses. There is, beneath all of this, a rhythm, a pattern. Work, break, bathe, eat, sleep. The human experience on a loop, even 4,000 years ago. You realize with a sigh that your bones ache in ways that feel older than the ziggurat itself. But in this moment, with your feet softening like overcooked lentils, and your ears full of gossip about the high priest's cousin's scandalous barley theft, you also feel strangely at peace. You lean back against the warm clay wall and close your eyes. Outside, the sky is fading from blazing ochre to soft purple. Inside, someone begins to hum a song about a shepherd and the moon. And though you don't know the words, the melody seems older than language itself. You listen, you breathe, and for just a while you simply are. Section 4. Darkness in you arrives not with a jolt, but like a cat, gradual, quiet, and a little smug. The sun dips behind the city's baked skyline, and a cool breeze rolls in from the Euphrates, carrying with it the scent of wet reeds, faint charcoal smoke, and whatever your neighbor is unsuccessfully roasting. You've dried off from your communal soak and shuffled home, your sandals sticking slightly to the clay in that way that means they'll leave odd footprints until morning. Your house is dim now, lit by a single oil lamp flickering like it's trying to whisper something to you in Proto-Akkadian. Dinner in your humble abode is unassuming. A bit of lentil mash, some dried onions, and count it, one, pickled turnip slice that somehow manages to both surprise and disappoint. But tonight isn't about the food. Tonight is about the stories. Because this, you see, is when the city begins to murmur its tales, when the merchants pack up, the temple gongs fall silent, and the families gather on rooftops or courtyards to share memories, myths, and mildly suspicious family histories. You settle into your mat, elbows tucked under your head, listening as your neighbor launches into a favorite, the legend of the king who tried to build a tower tall enough to knock on the god's front door. You've heard it before, of course, but repetition is the marrow of storytelling. And besides, each version adds new flair. This time, apparently, there's a sarcastic goose. But it gets you thinking, what was it like to be a Mesopotamian king? Not the divine, immortal kind. The real, bureaucratically exhausted type. You shift in your mat, eyes fixed on the ceiling shadows, and imagine. First off, you're not lounging around eating peeled grapes. You're scheduling flood repairs, inspecting grain silos, trying to avoid assassination, and pretending not to understand when someone demands the return of the sacred goat. Being a king in Mesopotamia is like running a school, a temple, and an irrigation system simultaneously, while wearing a hat that weighs 5 pounds. And the complaints. Oh, the complaints. Historians still debate whether the famed complaint tablets of Nippur were official records or just unusually committed venting. One reads, "The copper I ordered was inferior. The merchant insulted my intelligence. I demand restitution." Another, "He sold me a donkey that collapsed before sunset." That last one might explain your judgmental donkey from earlier. Some fringe archaeologists propose that Mesopotamian kings held weekly public hearings where citizens would air grievances directly to the royal court. It's unconfirmed, but there is a delightful image in imagining a king, chin resting on palm, hearing his 27th dispute of the day involving livestock and possibly curses. And speaking of curses, being king meant playing diplomat with the gods. That meant sacrifices, omens, appeasements, and dreams. Lots of dreams. You remember reading a tablet once where King Gudea of Lagash described a dream in which a god handed him a divine measuring stick and said, essentially, "Build me a temple or else." No pressure, just divine architectural deadlines. You shift again, letting the breeze wash over you, imagining the royal chambers at night. They weren't silent. The palace walls echoed with servants, petitions, priestly chants, and probably more than one kitchen fire. The king may have had gold, but he didn't have peace and quiet. You're doing better. Now here's a fun detail. Royal scribes often lived in the palace, transcribing dreams and reading liver omens. Yes, liver omens. The Mesopotamians believed a god's will could be divined by inspecting the liver of a sacrificed animal. The liver was basically the universe's suggestion box. And if the liver was lumpy, well, better postpone that temple construction. Eventually, even kings had to sleep. And here's the twist. Many of them slept outdoors, under open canopies on their rooftops. Not unlike you tonight, reclining under the stars, listening to the hum of nighttime you are and the distant rhythm of drums. You let your eyes close just a little. You hear laughter from the street below, a group of teenagers mock arguing over whose father can read the most cuneiform signs. One of them brags that his uncle can write flood insurance in Sumerian. You smile into the mat. The oil lamp flickers lower, and you, humble scribe of imaginary goats and real gossip, find yourself drifting gently, like a reed boat on the Euphrates, into the realm of dreams once reserved for kings and gods. Section 5. You wake slowly, long before the sun even considers making an appearance. There's a hush across you are, the kind of silence that only happens when people, animals, and even the occasional opinionated donkey are still tucked in sleep. The air is cool, barely, and carries that oddly metallic scent of a river nearby, mixed with dust, old bread, and the faintest trace of incense from a night offering. You stretch out across your reed mat, limbs creaking like the city's wooden ladders, and for a moment, you simply lie there, wrapped in the stillness of pre-dawn. And then you remember. You've been summoned, not in the dramatic sense, not by the gods, thankfully, or an angry goat dealer. No, you've been summoned to a temple kitchen, of all places. Apparently, your scribe services are needed for an important inventory involving sacred pastries, festival beer, and one very confusing shipment of fish. You groan, because even in ancient Mesopotamia, paperwork waits for no one. So, before the sky turns from charcoal to peach, you're already winding through back alleys with your stylus tucked into your sash and a slight scowl on your face. You pass a few other early risers, a potter mumbling to himself, a child chasing a chicken that absolutely does not want to be chased, and a temple guard who nods with the slow seriousness of someone who's been awake since the last moonrise. The temple kitchen is chaotic, not in the messy, flower on the ceiling kind of way, but in the there are 12 different gods to feed before noon kind of way. You're ushered in by a high cheekboned priestess who speaks like she's permanently out of patience. You're the scribe? Good. We have barley cakes to count, dates to tally, and the fish. Well, they're a problem. You blink. What kind of problem? She gestures to a reed basket in the corner. You look. You regret looking. Inside are several very large, very dead fish, none of which appear to be the same species. One may not even be a fish. You make a note to file this under, not my department. But your real job today is to record the food offerings being prepared for the upcoming festival of Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and according to several priests, a fierce craving for fig tarts. Mesopotamian temples didn't just serve as places of worship. They were also culinary hubs, economic centers, and part-time cafeterias for the divine. Entire staffs were devoted to preparing daily meals for gods who, despite being intangible, had very specific preferences. Offerings were cooked, arranged, and ceremonially served to divine statues who politely declined to eat, leaving the leftovers for the priests. Historians still argue whether these offerings were symbolic or if they carried deeper ritual meaning, something about feeding the gods to ensure cosmic balance. But what's undeniable is the level of organization. Some temples had storage rooms bigger than noble houses, filled with jars of honey, barley, beer, sesame oil, cucumbers, and a truly absurd amount of onions. You start logging items into your clay tablet, each wedge stroke punctuated by the shout of a cook or the sizzle of oil in a shallow pan. There's a rhythm to it. 3 jugs of date wine, 1 basket of lentil dumplings, for loaves shaped like a lion. Wait, you glance up. They're her favorite, someone says, shrugging. A fringe theory among scholars suggests that the shape of sacred foods mattered. A lion-shaped loaf for Ishtar, crescent pastries for Sin the moon god, and a sort of fish-sun combo tart for Shamash. It's speculative, but you're not in the mood to argue with a woman currently kneading dough like it owes her money. Mid-morning arrives, and the temple kitchen has hit its frenzied peak. You dodge a flying ladle, sidestep a priest carrying a steaming pot labeled "Do Not Taste," and manage to snag a honey cake off the offering table before it's officially consecrated. It's warm, sticky, and definitely worth the karmic risk. And as you sit on a low bench, chewing slowly, you feel it again, that odd sense of timelessness. The world moves forward in barley and steam, in fishy confusion and divine pastry orders, and you, tired scribe, are here to witness it all. You press the last marks into the tablet, still warm from the kitchen heat, and set it on the rack to dry. Another day, another absurd, sacred inventory. You stand, wipe your hands, and wonder idly whether there's a festival that doesn't require 12 gods and a suspicious tuna. Probably not. Section 6. The sun is fully awake now, and unfortunately, so is the city. UR hums like a pot left too long on the fire. Vendors shout, carts clatter, priests chant, and somewhere a small child is loudly, relentlessly trying to convince a goat to wear a flower crown. You, however, are mercifully done with the temple kitchen fiasco and making your way toward one of the few places in the city where you might find a moment of relative silence, the scribal archives. Housed in a long, low building near the base of the ziggurat, the archive is equal parts clay tablet storage, research center, and sanctuary for socially exhausted introverts. It's kept dim and cool, with reed mats along the walls and shelves stacked with tablets from generations past. Rows and rows of carefully dried thoughts. You inhale the scent of old dust, warm clay, and faint sandalwood. It's comforting, familiar, and slightly sneeze-inducing. You settle into a corner with a fresh tablet and a request from a priest. Locate the previous year's moon cycle records and compare them to this year's rainfall data. Which sounds thrilling, if your definition of thrilling includes deciphering 5 different forms of scribal shorthand and a lunar calendar that was clearly updated mid-year with 0 warning. Still, as you work, you find yourself drawn into the details. The symbols begin to form patterns. A drought noted here, a surplus of barley there, an eclipse accompanied by a flood. It's not glamorous work, but it is deeply human. Because in these brittle, wedge-marked slabs, people have tried to make sense of a sky, of time, of chaos. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian astronomy was driven by science, religion, or some nebulous blend of both. But there's no doubt these early skywatchers knew their stars. They tracked Venus with eerie precision, predicted eclipses, and gave us the earliest known star catalogs, etched not with poetry, but with clay, sweat, and stubborn observation. A fringe theory suggests one archive in Sippar housed a secret lunar correction committee, a group of scribes responsible for quietly tweaking the calendar when the moon misbehaved. No one's proven it, but you like the idea. A midnight council of clay slingers muttering about waning crescents over lukewarm beer. You shuffle through a few more tablets. One breaks slightly at the edge. You wince. There's something oddly intimate about damaging a 2,000-year-old weather complaint. You patch it with a bit of clay, smoothing the crack gently, like bandaging a very old, very whiny relative. Outside, the day burns on, but inside, the archive remains a cool cave of memory. Occasionally, another scribe enters, nods in silent greeting, and disappears into a corner with a tablet and an expression that says, "If I'm interrupted, someone is getting cursed." You feel at home here, because this is where history lives not as legend, but as logistics. Temple attendance figures, crop tallies, lunar sightings. It's all dull, precise, and deeply personal. The kind of data that tells you what people ate, feared, celebrated, and completely misunderstood about clouds. Eventually, you finish your moon cycle analysis, spoiler, still no rain, and leave the completed tablet on the scribe's rack. You rise, stretch your back, and glance at a shelf labeled miscellaneous unreadable fragments. It feels oddly relatable. You make a mental note to come back later and decipher one or two. Maybe they'll just say, "Don't forget the onions." Maybe they'll describe a god's dream. Either way, they'll whisper something from a world that believed writing could hold the shape of the cosmos. And you're just the person holding the stylus. Section 7. You step out of the archive blinking, not quite ready for the light, or the sudden smell of overcooked lentils wafting from a street stall nearby. The air has shifted. Midday heat is easing into something gentler, though the stone beneath your sandals still radiates with the memory of the sun. But no time for loitering. Today, you've got another task that has nothing to do with goats or godly snack schedules. You've been invited, voluntold really, to help a visiting dignitary navigate the city. And by help, of course, they mean escort, translate, flatter, and keep them from getting stung by any sacred bees. You arrive at the designated courtyard to find the guest already there. A tall, sunburned man from Elam, adorned in an aggressively feathered headdress and robes that suggest he either just left a wedding or got lost on the way to one. He's flanked by two equally overdressed assistants and a nervous-looking interpreter who seems to have confused Sumerian with soup. You introduce yourself. He grunts something friendly-ish and points to his sandals, which are clearly not Mesopotamian standard. You nod solemnly, as though his footwear is a matter of diplomatic importance. The day's tour begins. First stop, the market district, which, even by Mesopotamian standards, is chaotic. You guide the dignitary through tightly packed stalls where vendors hawk everything from lapis lazuli beads to what you're pretty sure is just an old shoe wrapped in fig leaves. The Elamite marvels at the silk routes, not the full span of them, of course, but the early trade trails connecting your city to far-off lands where silk, spices, and occasionally elephants make their way westward. He picks up a bolt of woven linen and sniffs it. You're not sure why. You don't ask. Historians still debate just how early the trade with East Asia began, but even in your lifetime, goods from far-flung places have become ordinary sights. Cinnamon, peacock feathers, strange nuts shaped like tiny helmets, items whose names you can't pronounce, but whose prices you absolutely can. The dignitary asks about a particular vendor selling what looks like dried lizards dipped in honey. You try to explain the local belief in their aphrodisiac powers without laughing. He nods seriously and buys 4. A fringe theory once claimed that some Mesopotamian merchants deliberately exaggerated the spiritual power of their wares to appeal to visiting foreigners. There's no hard evidence, but you've seen someone sell divine sand before, so possibly. Next, you pass a street musician playing an instrument made of goat hide and hollow reeds. It sounds like a duck arguing with a flute. The Elamite loves it. He claps. The musician bows. You tip him with a small string of dates, and he immediately launches into a ballad about a woman who married a river. You decide not to translate that one. As you weave through the city's crooked lanes, you stop by a potter's yard, a brewer's stall, yes, more casts, and even a scribe's kiosk offering to etch names onto good luck amulets. Your guest insists on getting his name carved into a clay pig. You oblige. Eventually, you bring him to the outer wall of the city for a view of the countryside. From here, the land stretches wide and gold. In the distance, you can just see the glint of irrigation canals, lines carved into the earth like stories written by water. The Elamite looks out. Quietly, thoughtfully. You realize he's been more than a tourist today. He's been taking notes. In his own way, he turns to you and, with deliberate care, offers a phrase in your language. Your city smells like onions, but it is strong. You nod. It's probably the highest praise he knows. The visit ends with a formal goodbye, a vague invitation to visit Elam you won't, and a final gift, a strange fruit wrapped in silk. You have no idea what it is. You're 60% sure it's not food. But you bow, thank him, and walk home with the odd little bundle tucked under your arm, already thinking how this will make an excellent story. And later, as the city winds down again, you sit on your mat, fruit beside you, and carve a single line into a small, private tablet. Today I guided a man who spoke like thunder and wore feathers to buy honey lizards. You smile. That's going in the archive. Section 8. It's been a long day. Your feet are sore, your shoulders are sunburned, and there's a mild but persistent itch behind your ear that you suspect is either sunstroke or karma. Still, you've earned your evening meal, a modest bowl of lentils, half a flatbread, and a slice of dried fig that crumbles like philosophical regret. But tonight, instead of collapsing into your reed mat or trying to decipher whether your mystery fruit from Elam is edible, it isn't, you try to nibble and briefly forgot your own name. You're invited to something different. A dinner party. Now, before you get excited, this is no Roman bacchanal. There are no reclining couches, no fountains of wine, and the only music will be someone's cousin with a lyre he can't quite tune. But in Mesopotamia, a well-hosted dinner among scribes, merchants, and middle-tier temple staff is a true treat. You tidy your tunic, splash your face with river water, and head out under a lavender dusk sky. The house is modest but clean, with oil lamps glowing softly in the doorway. You're greeted with the polite nods of people who have known each other long enough to skip pleasantries and go straight to complaints. You settle onto a woven mat beside a brewer and a potter. The host appears, carrying a large tray of food, barley cakes, roasted chickpeas, cucumber salad, stewed leeks, and daringly, a tiny bowl of imported garlic paste. Scandalously spicy. Definitely a flex. Someone pours a round of tamarisk wine, sweet, woody, and strong enough to make your eyebrows lean slightly to the left. You sip cautiously. Conversations hum. One scribe complains about a recent miscopying scandal. Someone accidentally recorded 900 sheep instead of 90, causing what was apparently a hilarious over-sacrifice. A merchant swears he saw a lion in the canal last week. The brewer tells a story about a customer who claimed to have been cursed by flat beer. You laugh. You chew. You refill your cup. And then, as all good Mesopotamian dinner parties must, the storytelling begins. It starts with a quiet clearing of the throat from the eldest guest, a retired tax collector known for his long beard and longer pauses. Everyone leans in. He begins. The tale is set long ago, under a moon that listened, and follows a clumsy priest who tried to impress the goddess Ishtar by baking her a cake the size of a ziggurat. The details are fuzzy. There's a mishap involving lentils, and a brief but intense subplot about a missing sandal, but by the end, everyone is howling with laughter. Historians still argue whether these stories, part myth, part joke, part cautionary tale, were originally religious instruction or just early stand-up. But they're old, and they stick. Even now, you catch yourself mouthing the final line. And that's why never trust a camel that sings. A fringe theory from one eccentric scholar even claims that some of these tales were coded critiques of local officials, safely veiled in humor to avoid divine or bureaucratic smiting. You wouldn't know, but the sly look the brewer gives you during the story about a greedy fish who taxed the river is suggestive. Later, as the food dwindles and the wine settles, you feel the quiet warmth of camaraderie, the kind that comes not from shared beliefs, but from shared days, hard work, absurd errands, sunburns, and all. You find yourself telling a story, too, about the Elamite dignitary and the honey lizards. It gets laughs. Someone offers to write a song about it. You suggest they include the line, he sniffed the linen like it owed him money. Eventually, the evening winds down. You thank the host, bow to the oldest guest, and make your way home under a sky littered with stars. The moon is high now, silver, silent, and maybe just a little smug. You lie down on your mat and feel full, not just in your stomach, but in your bones. Because tonight, under oil lamp and laughter, you remembered something important. History is not just events. It's meals, jokes, stray sandals, and shared stories told to people with lentils in their teeth. Section 9. You awaken the next morning to the dulcet sounds of a rooster yelling at nobody in particular and two neighbors arguing over who borrowed whose sandal last summer. You roll over, tug your tunic over your head, and take stock of your mood, mildly hungover on tamarisk wine and deeply uninterested in anything involving tablets. But fate, as always, disagrees. Because today, you've been called to the one place in you are where even the bravest scribes tread carefully the house of healing. It's not quite a hospital, not quite a temple, and definitely not the sort of place you visit unless something is leaking, broken, or possessed. You arrive mid-morning, clutching a request tablet from the high priest. Apparently, the House of Healing needs help cataloging its medicinal inventory, everything from frankincense and fish oil to crocodile dung and copper filings. You try not to make a face. You mostly fail. The building itself is unassuming, its clay walls stained with years of herbal smoke and indecisive lizards. Inside, it smells like every unpleasant tea you've ever tried, boiled into a single confusing aroma. A healer greets you with the brisk, competent air of someone who has absolutely no time for your nonsense and hands you a wax list. You start work in the back room, next to a shelf labeled uncategorized oils and maybe curses. That's not a joke. That's the actual label. As you copy down ingredients, you're struck by the sheer weirdness and weird wisdom of Mesopotamian medicine. Liver problems, rub the belly with warm beer. Toothache, a mix of crushed garlic and frog bile, recited over by a priest chanting about the moon. Night terrors, sleep with a clay figurine shaped like a fish under your pillow. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian healing was closer to science or sorcery. The truth, as always, is murky. There were medical texts, some surprisingly detailed, and trained practitioners who passed down treatments over generations. But healing was also deeply tied to the gods, omens, and whatever dream someone's cousin had during the full moon. A fringe tablet you once saw claimed that sneezing exactly 7 times in a row was a sign that the demon of breathlessness had entered your nostrils. The suggested cure: eat cooked onions and yell, "Be gone!" toward the river. You're almost tempted to try that one just for fun. As the day wears on, you assist in translating a few prescription tablets. One is for a woman with recurring fevers and mentions both a poultice of mashed dates and a prayer to Ninkarak, goddess of healing dogs. Another references bone worms, which you sincerely hope is a metaphor. You take a break near a brazier where herbs are being burned to cleanse the room. The smoke curls upward, perfumed with myrrh and something like mint, and your eyes water in a way that feels vaguely therapeutic. One of the younger healers joins you, holding a dried pomegranate and a very sharp knife. She begins slicing it without a word, then offers you half. You accept. The fruit is tart, juicy, and oddly calming. She nods and says, "Good for sadness." You nod back. You don't ask how she knew. You wrap up your work by cataloging a shelf of emergency treatments. Among them, opium, used sparingly, cow's milk boiled with copper flakes, and something described only as lion balm. You don't want to know. Before you leave, a healer hands you a tiny amulet shaped like a coiled snake. "Protection," she says simply, "from worms. The regular kind. and the spirit kind. You smile, thank her, and tuck it into your sash. That night, as you lie back on your mat, body aching in weird new places from crouching all day, you feel the snake amulet press against your side. You don't believe in spirit worms. Not really. But still, you keep it close. Just in case. Section 10. The next day begins, as so many do when you are, with shouting. Specifically, your neighbor shouting at her third son for trying to trade the family's broom for a questionable chicken. You hear something about feathers, curses, and, I told you not to trust that boy from Lagash. You roll over and pretend to still be asleep, but soon enough, you're up and dressed, well draped, and heading toward a rare assignment. Today, you're not scribbling sheep counts or healing chants. Today, you're to visit one of the city's workyards, where the daily grind of Mesopotamian laborers unfolds in all its dusty, rhythmic, and oddly poetic glory. You arrive just after dawn. The yard buzzes with movement, potters shaping clay with sure, steady fingers, brickmakers kneading mud and straw like it's bread dough for very aggressive gods, weavers clattering on horizontal looms that look more like primitive jungle gyms. You're greeted by the overseer, a leathery man with the kind of expression that suggests he hasn't smiled since the last eclipse. He hands you a slab of clay and tells you to observe, record, and don't get in the way of anyone with a hammer. You nod. That last part feels especially important. Your first stop, brickmaking. You watch as men and women stomp barefoot through pits of wet clay, adding chopped straw and ash in precise, time-worn ratios. The resulting mixture is slapped into molds, smooth with reeds, and left to dry in neat rows under the relentless sun. Each brick bears a seal, usually the symbol of a temple, king, or god, pressed while the clay is still soft. It's repetitive work, grueling, but there's a kind of rhythm to it. You jot notes, number of bricks per hour, techniques for smoothing edges, a debate between two workers over whether goats or oxen make better fertilizer sources. Historians still argue whether these workyards were state-controlled or community-managed, but either way, they were vital. Cities like UR didn't rise from divine intervention. They rose from mud, muscle, and sheer repetition. Next, you're shown the pottery station, where a mother-daughter duo works side by side, spinning wheels by hand and shaping bowls so uniform you suspect witchcraft. You ask how they get them so perfectly round. The mother shrugs and says, practice, prayer, and yelling at your daughter. The daughter rolls her eyes. A fringe theory once claimed that Mesopotamian potters sang specific rhythms to guide their hands and coordinate group firings. No recordings, obviously, but the cadence of voices rising and falling in the yard feels suspiciously musical. By mid-morning, you find yourself at the textile shed, where looms clack and reed baskets overflow with dyed wool. The air is fragrant, spiced with lanolin, dye wood, and sweat. A weaver beckons you over to explain the pattern she's working on, alternating red and indigo threads in a motif of zigzags, meant to symbolize river currents. Helps the gods remember we're downstream, she says with a grin. You write that one down. As the day wears on, you notice the smaller details, the calloused hands, the half-sung proverbs passed between workers, the silent gestures that coordinate tasks better than shouting ever could. Lunch is shared communally, passed around on flat stones and in hollowed gourds. You're handed a mash of beans and lentils spiced with cumin and something pungent that might be fermented garlic. It's delicious and slightly alarming. By afternoon, the sun hits its peak and the pace slows. Workers lean against walls, sip water from ceramic flasks, and swap riddles while their tools cool. One man offers you a joke. What walks on two legs, eats too much cas, and still owes me 5 shekels. You guess wrong. He says, my brother. Everyone laughs. You return to the overseer, clay tablet now filled with observations, quotes, and at least 2 doodles of chickens wearing sandals. He reads over it, nods, and says, you're not the worst scribe we've had. High praise indeed. As you leave, you glance back at the yard, at the hands shaping the bones of a city, one brick, one bowl, one thread at a time. No one here will be remembered in a statue, but they are the rhythm beneath the temples. The reason any of this works. That night, you sleep hard, and somewhere in your dreams, a loom clacks, a pot spins, a hammer rises and falls, and you are walking through the heartbeat of a city. Section 11. You're awoken the next morning not by roosters or gossip, but by drums. Low, deliberate, pulsing drums that roll through the city like a distant storm. You sit up, disoriented, your blanket twisted around your legs like an ambitious octopus. Outside, people are already moving. Fast, focused, curious. Something's happening. You throw on your tunic, grab your stylus, because who knows when inspiration will strike, and follow the flow of bodies toward the main avenue. The drums grow louder, joined by flutes, the occasional sharp clash of cymbals, and a voice shouting what may or may not be celebratory riddles. You've stumbled into a procession. Not just any parade, though. This is a festival march in honor of Ningal, goddess of reeds, dreams, and moonlight. She's not the loudest deity in the pantheon, but she gets one festival a year where everyone pretends they've been loyal fans all along. The streets are lined with onlookers. Clay lanterns dangle from posts. Children dart between legs wearing masks shaped like foxes and moon crescents. And then comes the procession itself. Priests in silver-threaded robes, dancers swaying in circles, and a cart carrying an enormous effigy of Ningal made of painted wood and actual river reeds. It's slightly drooping on one side. You suspect someone forgot the base supports. Historians still debate the true purpose of these processions, whether they were acts of devotion, public morale boosters, or elaborate tax write-offs. But to you, they feel alive. You don't worship Ningal per se, but there's something oddly moving about watching a group of old men wave moonflowers and chant about dream clarity. A fringe belief held by temple musicians claims that each note played during the procession realigns the dreams of the entire city for one night. Whether or not that's true, you make a mental note to avoid cheese before bed. You fall into step beside a young boy carrying a basket of tiny offerings, reed dolls, bits of barley, and what might be a painted rock shaped like a fish. He offers you one. You accept with a solemn nod. The fish rock now lives in your sash pocket, next to the anti-worm snake amulet. You're collecting quite the mystical menagerie. As the parade winds its way toward the ziggurat, you notice a side ritual taking place near the river, a group of women releasing reed boats into the current, each carrying a candle and a scrap of papyrus inscribed with a hope or wish. You watch, mesmerized, as the boats drift out and flicker into the distance. One tips over almost immediately. You hope that wish wasn't urgent. By midday, the parade reaches the temple steps. There, the effigy of Ningal is lifted, very carefully, and placed inside the sanctuary with much bowing, chanting, and at least one dropped incense bowl. You linger at the edge of the crowd, recording a few phrases from a chant that sticks in your mind. By silver branch and woven stream, give sleep its shape and grant no scream. You pause. That's actually lovely. You scribble it down before the moment passes. Then come the festival games. These are more chaotic than sacred. There's wrestling in the dust, speed date divination you don't win, and a bizarre contest involving melon rind boats and increasingly competitive old women. You cheer them on. One of them elbows a merchant so hard he drops his honey figs. It's glorious. Later, you're handed a ceremonial drink, thick, sweet, probably fermented in a pot that once held fish. You take a cautious sip and immediately forget the names of several relatives. Not bad. As the sun begins its slow descent, the energy changes. People quiet. Candles are lit. A hush falls as a priestess stands atop the temple stairs and sings a hymn to Ningal in a voice that sounds like river stones being rubbed together. The words drift down. Sleep, sweet lady, cradle the fields. Bind the beasts. Loosen the tongue of dream. You feel a shiver. The crowd begins to disperse. The moon is rising, large and pale and slightly lopsided, like it, too, partied a little too hard. You head home, slow, thoughtful, and just a little dizzy. The fish rock is still in your sash. You hold it up toward the moon and say, "Sweet dreams." Then you tuck it under your mat, climb onto your woven bed, and drift off into whatever Ningal has planned for you tonight. Section 12. The morning after the Ningal festival has a peculiar stillness to it, like the whole city is holding its breath, or collectively nursing the aftertaste of that dubious ceremonial drink. You wake late, your mat slightly askew, and discover that at some point during the night, you rolled directly onto your fish-shaped festival rock. It has left a perfect crescent-shaped indent in your back. You stretch, wince, and make a mental note. Perhaps mystical souvenirs shouldn't be used as pillows. Outside, Uar is slowly stirring to life. The street sweepers are out early, brushing away confetti made of dyed papyrus and trampled fig leaves. A nearby stall is already selling what's advertised as post-festival soup, a brothy, restorative mystery containing barley, onion, and something that may once have been a lentil. But before you can fully engage with your day, there's a tap on your door. It's a young temple runner, breathless and dusty. He hands you a clay tablet with the familiar mark of the local law office. Not temple law, civic law. You sigh. Time for some legal scribing. This is a different kind of writing. More rigid, formulaic, and absolutely full of people being very upset about extremely minor offenses. You walk across the city to the scribe's corner of the judicial court, passing under shaded arches and between buildings that always seem 2 bricks away from crumbling. The court is already buzzing. A judge in a tall felt cap is presiding from a platform. 2 farmers are locked in a spirited argument over who owns a particular goat. The goat, for its part, is chewing on someone's robe and looks extremely unimpressed. Your task: transcribe the proceedings onto clay, neatly, with no commentary, which is, frankly, a shame because you have thoughts. The trial begins. Farmer A accuses Farmer B of goat theft. Farmer B insists the goat wandered onto his land and therefore is his by divine mandate. Farmer A counters with a receipt tablet that's mostly intact, save for a suspicious thumbprint smudging the date. The judge asks questions. The goat bleats. A witness is called, an elderly neighbor with a memory like wet bark and a fondness for dramatic pauses. Historians still argue about the fairness of Mesopotamian courts. On one hand, the code of Uar-Nammu and later Hammurabi's code outline surprisingly clear standards of justice. On the other hand, interpretation often depended on the mood of the judge, the neatness of the paperwork, and whether any celestial omens were acting up. You do your best to remain neutral as you inscribe. The goat, it is said, did leap the canal wall. The claimant insists it was called by name and did turn its head in recognition. Poetry, really. Eventually, the judge rules in favor of Farmer A on the grounds that the goat does, in fact, respond to plump 1. Farmer B is fined a small jar of honey and made to apologize publicly, which he does with the enthusiasm of a sulking child. A fringe theory from one professor claims that Mesopotamian trials often ended with communal meals to restore balance. Today's outcome: the 2 farmers share a plate of cucumber slices and roasted barley, eaten with as much passive aggression as humanly possible. Your day continues. A property dispute over a shared fence. A merchant accused of watering down sesame oil. A woman who claims her neighbor's rooster is possessed. Each case is logged, detailed, and carefully punctuated in cuneiform. You now have a small blister on your stylus hand and an overwhelming desire to never see another goat again. But even in this tangle of petty quarrels, you sense the deeper currents of Mesopotamian life: community, boundaries, pride, and the desperate need to feel heard. These aren't just legal cases. They're slices of lived experience, set in clay like fossilized gossip. By late afternoon, the case is slow. You dust your hands, roll your shoulders, and slip your tablet into the archive bin. On your way out, the judge stops you. He says nothing, but hands you a roasted chickpea and nods solemnly. You accept it like a medal. Back home, you lie on your mat, gaze at the ceiling, and whisper softly to your fishrock. Never commit goat theft, especially if the goat has a nickname. Section 13. Today begins with an unexpected luxury: no summons. No temple errands, no kitchen crises, no goat lawsuits. Just the warm glow of the morning sun slipping through your reed-blind window, and the gentle chorus of neighbors sweeping, chickens clucking, and someone humming what might be an ode to breakfast. You yawn, stretch your limbs like a lazy ox, and decide. Today you will visit the schoolhouse. The Adaba, or tablet house, sits at the edge of the scribal quarter, nestled between a grain storeroom and a shrine dedicated to the goddess Nisaba, patron of writing. It's not a particularly grand building, but the air around it always crackles with energy. Part reverence, part dread, you're greeted by the head instructor, a stern man with ink-stained fingers and a forehead so furrowed it could qualify as agricultural land. He recognizes you instantly. You again, he says with a sigh that contains several chapters of your teenage years. You smile and bow, here to observe, not to misplace anyone's stylus this time. He grunts. The main classroom is just a shaded courtyard, scattered with low benches and baskets of damp clay tablets. Around a dozen students, mostly boys aged 8 to 14, are hunched over their work, reed styluses clutched in tight fists, brows furrowed like they're trying to invent time itself. One boy looks up at you, whispers something to his neighbor, and snorts. You hear the phrase, "Go poetry." You choose to feel honored. The lesson today: transcription of standard wisdom texts. You watch as the students copy lines like, "He who does not listen to the elder's word, his house shall collapse." "The lazy man's bowl is always empty, even during harvest." "Do not anger the scribe, for he writes your fate." You raise an eyebrow at that last one. The instructor doesn't smile. He's definitely the one who added it. Historians still argue whether these wisdom texts were purely moral instruction or if they doubled as linguistic drills, structured to reinforce grammar, vocabulary, and correct wedge angles. Either way, they're deeply memorable. Some students recite them aloud in slow, rhythmic cadence, like lullabies made of mild threats. You sit beside one boy who's diligently carving out a proverb but has reversed 2 of the signs. You gently correct him, and he sighs with dramatic despair. "I'll never pass the stylus exam." You tell him he will. You don't mention that you once failed it 3 times because you couldn't remember how to write turnip. He doesn't need that kind of fear in his life. During the midday break, students gather under a fig tree, chewing on dates and swapping complaints about ink stains, stylus splinters, and the recent ban on tablet graffiti. Someone carved Nasaba's mid into a test copy last week. Scandalous. A fringe theory suggests that ancient Adaba students occasionally formed scribal gangs, rival groups who competed in secret challenges of speed copying and insult poetry. No evidence yet, but the tension between the East Wall kids and the courtyard clique feels suspicious. The afternoon lesson shifts to arithmetic, units of grain, division of livestock, and temple tax math, so convoluted you need 3 fingers and a small prayer to solve it. The instructor explains a barley ratio problem so fast you suspect he's doing it just to watch their faces. You assist a small group in figuring out how many oxen it takes to transport a shipment of sesame from Lagash to Ur if each ox walks at a certain pace, rests every 2 hours, and requires 5 handfuls of fodder per leg. You're not sure if the math is practical, but it does create some excellent chaos. As the day winds down, you help gather the tablets and smooth them for reuse, watered and repressed into flat, muddy slates. A few are saved to be fired in the kiln, marked with proud seals and a tiny carved star that means excellent effort. You remember that feeling. Before you leave, one student shyly offers you a tablet he's written for practice. It reads, "The scribe walks between gods and men. Also, he smells like ink." You laugh, thank him, and tuck it into your sash. That evening, back on your mat, you read the tiny wedge script again by lamplight. It's lopsided, clumsy, beautiful. You fall asleep wondering if the gods smile every time a child learns to write their name in clay. Section 14. The next morning, the winds shift. Not just a breeze, but a true dust wind, one of those slow-moving, sand-tinted sighs from the western desert that coats everything in a thin, crunchy layer of history. You step outside and immediately feel the grit between your teeth. Even the birds sound irritable, which means only one thing. Today is a perfect day for staying inside and doing absolutely nothing. Unfortunately, you've been invited to a household ritual. You thought it was just a casual lunch invite from your cousin. Turns out, she meant come help me appease my house gods because weird stuff keeps happening in the pantry. You sigh, brush the dust off your tunic, and head across town with the solemn pace of someone who knows they're about to sprinkle flour for reasons that may or may not be supernatural. Your cousin's home is small but tidy. She greets you at the door with the kind of expression that says, "Yes, the roof leaks, but that's not the problem." You step inside. A chicken immediately flees from under a bench. Suspicious. She explains, strange noises at night, jars of grain mysteriously overturned, and a dream about a flaming goat. It's time, she says, to honor the Lamassu, the protective household spirits of ancient Mesopotamian belief. You're roped in as ritual scribe. This means you get to sit at a low table, copy out a protective incantation in neat cuneiform, and try not to sneeze while the air fills with smoke from burning juniper, onion peels, and what might be crushed date pits. The ceremony itself is simple. Your cousin lights a series of tiny oil lamps around the room, places small offerings, barley, honey, a slice of melon, and whispers the words you've written onto the clay. Then she claps 3 times, spits over her left shoulder, and tells the spirit it's now officially on guard duty again. You're not saying you believe any of this, but the room does feel lighter afterward. Historians still argue whether these household rituals were independent folk practices or officially sanctioned offshoots of temple rites. Either way, they were intimate, deeply woven into daily life. Every home had its own small altar, sometimes just a brick shelf or a clay figure of a deity smirking slightly. A fringe theory suggests that some Mesopotamians viewed their spirits less like fearsome protectors and more like moody roommates, requiring gifts, praise, and the occasional apology. Honestly, based on today's ritual, that feels entirely accurate. After the ceremony, your cousin makes you lunch, a thick stew of lentils and dried fish seasoned with tamarind and regret. It's an acquired taste. She insists the spirit loves it. You're not so sure. The afternoon passes lazily. You help rearrange the family shrine, nudging little figurines of Nasaba, Enki, and one suspiciously fat lion into aesthetically pleasing poses. You also help chase the same chicken out of the pantry twice. You begin to wonder if the flaming goat dream wasn't just bad poultry vibes. Before you leave, your cousin presses a small amulet into your palm, a miniature clay tablet no bigger than a fig, inscribed with a sign for quiet protection. You nod solemnly, then sneak one more barley cake from the altar on your way out. The spirit probably won't mind. Probably. Back at home, you place the tiny amulet near your sleeping mat, between your fish rock and anti-worm snake. You're becoming quite the collector. Outside, the dust wind finally begins to settle. And inside, with the scent of juniper still clinging to your tunic and the faint sound of prayers echoing in your ears, you settle in for a rare, quiet evening. Just you, your gods, your weirdly judgmental rock collection, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, one very smug chicken is still plotting. Section 15. Today's assignment arrives in the form of a half-broken tablet delivered by a child with jam on his face and no intention of slowing down to explain anything. You decipher what's left between the sticky smudges and find, with mild surprise, that you've been summoned to the city's dockyard. You don't get many reasons to visit the riverfront these days. It's mostly the realm of traders, boatmen, and people who smell like wet rope. But every so often, the temple needs a scribe to log inventory from the incoming barges, and today that's you. The Euphrates stretches out before you, brown and wide and filled with more stories than water. Wooden barges bob along the bank, loaded with everything from bundles of reeds to crates of pomegranates, and one extremely angry goose. You approach the foreman, who gestures vaguely at a pile of incoming goods, and then disappears to yell at a sailor. You pull out your stylus and get to work. The dock ledger is no simple list. Each shipment must be noted with origin, weight, contents, estimated delivery time, and, bizarrely, the mood of the river that day. Choppy but cooperative is a perfectly acceptable entry. You suspect someone once wrote jealous, but no one brings that up anymore. You move from barge to barge, inspecting jars of date syrup, baskets of onions, and dyed cloth from distant cities with names that sound like sneezes. Occasionally, a trader shouts something about taxes or accusations of theft. You try to look busy. You are, after all, just the scribe. Historians still debate the extent of Mesopotamian river commerce, but there's no denying it formed the arteries of these ancient cities. Goods, ideas, rumors, and the occasional confused flamingo floated in from all directions. And every item that crossed the dock was documented, eventually, by someone like you, hunched over a tablet, frowning at a mislabeled box of salted fish. A fringe theory posits that dock scribes wielded informal power, subtly adjusting inventories to favor certain merchants or temple clients. It's unproven, but after seeing today's load of what is absolutely not fine-grade copper, you can see the temptation. You pause at one particularly curious crate labeled Sacred Sandals, handle with devotion. You open it, Inside are 4 mismatched leather shoes and a handwritten note that reads, "We tried." You close the crate again. Midday comes, and the docks settle into a slower rhythm. You sit near a cargo net and chew a lunch of dried chickpeas and spiced cucumber, watching a group of boatmen untangle ropes while arguing about which city-state has the worst singing festivals. One man insists it's Uruk. Another swears Lagash once hosted a flute-only opera that cleared the audience in under 8 minutes. You're inclined to believe both. Later, a large barge arrives from the south, loaded with wool and stories. One sailor tells you about a floating temple made entirely of woven reeds, gliding silently through the marshes at night. You write it down, not for the temple records, just for you. By day's end, your tablet is heavy with inventory corrections and a brief side note about the goose, who has now bitten 3 people and claimed a barrel as its territory. You hand your work to the foreman, who grunts something that might be thanks or curse you. As you leave, the sky deepens to gold. The river glistens, and the air cools, carrying the scent of clay, fish, and adventure. You glance back once at the docks. Then you head home, legs aching, tablet arms sore, and one step closer to understanding how a city keeps breathing. Section 16. Today doesn't begin with a goat. That on its own feels suspicious. Instead, you wake to an unusually quiet street and a sense of expectation. Something in the air, something humming just below the dust and sun. You step outside and are almost immediately handed a reed scroll by a passing courier who says, "It's your turn." Your turn. You read the scroll. Ah, the city is holding a mock trial, a sort of public theatrical ritual where citizens try mythical figures, ancient rulers, or concepts like greed, laziness, or leaky roofs. And lucky you've been selected to act as scribe and narrator for today's event. Today's accused, King Sargon of Akkad, charged with starting far too many wars, taking all the good clay, and inventing the worst tax policies in recorded memory. You arrive at the square just as a young man dressed in a wildly inaccurate royal costume is being booed by a crowd of cheerful hecklers. He waves regally. Someone throws a figure. It's delightful. You're ushered to a raised platform, handed a fresh tablet, and told to record the truth as interpreted by this complete circus. You nod solemnly. You were born for this. The mock trial begins. A local baker acts as a judge. He's wearing a fish-shaped hat for no reason other than that it feels right. 2 merchants serve as prosecuting speakers. One accuses Sargon of stealing canal water. The other reads a passionate poem titled Ode to the Time Before Akkad. Sargon's defense team is made up of 2 temple assistants who mainly argue that he meant well and his mother was a goddess, so technically he outranks us anyway. You try to keep a straight face as you write. Let the record show that the accused did respond to charges of imperial overreach by shouting, "Waiwelo" in Akkadian. The crowd laughs. Someone in the back starts a chant. "Too many bricks! Too many bricks!" No one knows what it means, but it catches on. Historians still argue whether these kinds of public rituals were mere entertainment or served a deeper civic purpose, allowing citizens to question authority and poke fun at power structures without consequence. Today, at least, it feels like both. A fringe belief claims that these trials were once used to settle real grievances cloaked in satire, letting communities air frustrations in a way that didn't risk divine smiting. The evidence is thin, but the emotions are real. As the trial continues, more absurd charges are leveled. He monopolized the best scribes and made them write love poems to his sandals. He claimed victory in battles that historians still say were extremely dicey. He banned pudding. That last one causes a minor riot. You have to pause writing to prevent a small child from climbing onto the judge's platform to shout, "Pudding rights." Eventually, the jury, i.e., the loudest people near the front, delivers a verdict, guilty. Sargon is sentenced to spend 1 hour apologizing to every statue in the temple garden. The man in the costume bows and begins dramatically asking forgiveness from a stone lion. You finish your tablet with the line, "Thus ended the trial of Sargon, the sometimes reasonable. May his sandals always chafe." It's not legally binding, but it's probably more satisfying than most real court decisions. As the crowd disperses, still giggling, a priestess approaches and thanks you for keeping the record. "We'll preserve the tablet," she says, "for the next festival. Or a rainy day." You hand it over, already imagining future generations reading it and wondering if this was all metaphor. That night, as you sip barley tea under a sky gone deep blue, you replay the day's events. You think about truth, performance, history, and the fact that sometimes the best way to understand power is to roast it gently in public. You sleep well. No goats. No lawsuits. Just the echo of laughter across the stones. Section 17. You wake to a low, rhythmic sound, chanting. Not the dramatic, echo through the temple kind. More like a group of people humming slightly out of tune while someone hits a bronze bowl with a spoon. It's peaceful, in a wobbly sort of way. You pull on your tunic and step into the morning light to find a cluster of neighbors gathered near the shrine of Nisaba, the goddess of writing, wisdom, and slightly sarcastic insights. Today, it seems, is her day of quiet devotion, a rare festival not marked by parades or feasts, but by communal silence and reflection. Well, mostly silence. You're approached by a temple aide who, in a voice barely above a whisper, asks if you'll help oversee today's book ritual, a sort of ceremonial cleaning and recopying of the city's most sacred and peculiar clay texts. You nod. It sounds restful, a good way to stretch your fingers without getting cursed by poultry. At the temple archive, you're greeted by a half-dozen scribes already deep in silent labor. Each sits with a worn tablet, a clean slab, and a gentle brush made of woven grass. They work slowly, reverently, copying each sign with the care of someone coaxing history out of mud. You take your seat and are handed your tablet of the day, an odd, ancient text titled The Dialogue Between a Drunk Man and His Goat. It's exactly as strange as it sounds. You begin to copy. Line by line, you etch the conversation. Part satire, part wisdom tale, all delightful. The drunk man complains about taxes. The goat responds with biting commentary about inflation and footwear. There's a long section where they debate whether figs should be boiled or roasted. You are completely enchanted. Historians still argue about the purpose of these so-called dialogue texts, early literary pieces preserved alongside royal decrees and legal codes. Some believe they were used to teach students nuance. Others think they were just really old memes. A fringe theory suggests this particular tablet was an inside joke between two rival scribes left in the archive to confuse later generations. If true, it's working beautifully. Around you, others copy different texts, ritual hymns, mathematical proofs, grain inventories, and one suspiciously poetic recipe for lentil stew. Occasionally, someone hums softly or sighs with satisfaction after finishing a line. No one speaks. It's lovely. Midway through the day, you take a break and wander into the library garden, a small enclosed courtyard filled with fig trees, lavender, and chirping stone birds powered by wind. You sit near a fountain and nibble on a date. It tastes like sunshine and time. A young apprentice joins you and asks, via a series of scribbled notes, why scribes bother to copy these texts at all. If no one reads them, she writes, what's the point? You write back. Sometimes we preserve things not because they're useful, but because they meant something once. She nods, solemnly, and returns to her tablet. You head back in, refreshed, and finish your goat dialogue with a final line that reads, "The man laughed, and the goat did not. Thus wisdom was achieved." You hand the finished copy to the temple librarian, who seals it in a basket labeled Philosophy and thanks you with a bow. As the sun sets, the scribes gather to return the newly recopied tablets to the archive shelves. The air feels heavy with words, some ancient, some silly, all sacred in their own quiet way. That night, you lie on your mat, thinking not of wars or taxes, but of conversations with goats, silent libraries, and the strange, stubborn persistence of stories. And as you drift off, you swear you hear a faint braying laugh from somewhere in the distance. Section 18. The next morning, you're roused by a knock. Not urgent, not frantic, but the polite, rhythmic knock of someone who absolutely wants something. You open the door to find a well-dressed stranger with a scroll, a smile, and a tone that instantly tells you, this is a bureaucrat. "I bring greetings," he says smoothly, "and a request. You have been chosen to assist in today's census effort. We need a reliable scribe to ensure the official tallies are slightly more accurate than last year's." He hands you a tablet, already half cracked from travel, and adds, And try not to anger anyone this time. You don't ask what happened last time. You just nod and follow. Today's work will take you through several districts of UR, each one with its own smells, sounds, and styles of complaining. The census is no mere head count. It's a full economic, social, and divine accounting of who lives where, owns what, worships which gods, and owes how many goats. Your first stop, the brickmaker's quarter. The air is thick with smoke and mud, and the workers are wary. The last census apparently resulted in new tax categories for excessive brick enthusiasm. You begin gently, asking each household for names, occupations, and how many dependents reside under their roof. One man claims 17. You count 6. He winks. Next, the merchant ward, a tangle of stalls, shouting, and sweet smoke from imported incense. Here, things are trickier. Everyone has exactly 4 employees. No one earns more than a modest 2 shekels. And every goat is, apparently, visiting from another district. You log what you can. Historians still argue about the reliability of Mesopotamian censuses. They were detailed, yes. Some tablets list entire families, household goods, and livestock down to the last chicken, but they were also vulnerable to exaggeration, evasion, and poetic math. A fringe theory suggests some scribes were bribed with honey cakes to round down figures. You've already received 3 such cakes today. You've eaten 2. You're only human. The artisan block is easier, full of weavers, potters, and metalworkers who treat the census like an annoying festival tradition. One woman proudly recites her household details like a temple hymn. Another demands to know why the census never includes her prized cat. You add a line, one respected cat, black, intense glare. You also note how people decorate their homes. Some have painted clay masks above their doorways. Others hang bundles of garlic, or small reed charms in the shape of fish, owls, or stylized gods. You sketch a few into your tablet's margin. Future historians will thank you. Maybe. Midday, you pause for a meal of warm barley bread and fermented fish paste. It's sharp, but the family hosting you insists it's a delicacy, and you're too polite to decline. After lunch, you head to the scribal alley, where you're greeted like a celebrity. Or, more accurately, like the guy who once dropped an ink pot on a tax record and blamed it on divine intervention. You log your fellow scribes, names, apprentices, scroll collections, and how many styluses have mysteriously vanished this year. The number is astonishing. One man has 6 styluses and no explanation. You simply write possible stylus hoarder and move on. Your final stop is the temple quarter, where the priests and priestesses take the census very seriously. You're handed beautifully written ledgers and asked to simply verify and honor the divine accuracy therein. Translation: don't question anything. You don't. By day's end, your tablet is filled with names, numbers, minor bribes, and at least one poetic aside about a man who believes his wife's bread causes divine visions. You'll edit that bit later. As you return your completed census tablet to the central office, the bureaucrat thanks you with a nod and a fresh scroll for next year's preparation. You tuck it under your arm, already planning to lose it in the near future. That night, you sit on your mat, hands sore, back stiff, and head swimming with names. But as you drift off, you feel something else too. A quiet satisfaction. Because for one day, you helped map a city, not in roads or walls, but in people. In lives, in stories etched into clay so they wouldn't be forgotten. Even the cat. Section 19. The day begins with smoke on the horizon. Not ominous, not panicked, just the thick, gray plumes of kills at work in the potter's district. You catch the scent before you even leave your mat. Fire, clay, and that sharp mineral edge of glazes being born in the heat. It clicks instantly. Today is firing day, and you've got an invite. Pottery may not be as glamorous as temple rituals or kingly proclamations, but in a city like you are, it's the quiet infrastructure of life. Bowls, jugs, lamps, seal cases, tablet boxes, almost everything useful passes through the hands of potters. And today, the big communal kiln is open. You arrive mid-morning. The courtyard is bustling. Rows of half-finished vessels line the shaded walls, still damp and delicate. Potters dart about, barefoot and streaked with ash, arranging their work into firing order like generals prepping for battle. You greet the master potter, a tall woman named Tibaloo with arms like tree trunks and a laugh that shakes dust off roof tiles. You're the scribe, she asks. Good. Keep your fingers out of the slip buckets. She hands you a short list of inventory. Who made what, what's being fired, who still owes her for that one vase that exploded last month. You find a corner near the tool rack and start scribbling. The firing begins. The kiln is a squat, dome-shaped beast, blackened with age, its mouth glowing orange. Assistants feed it slowly, first kindling, then larger hunks of charcoal. Smoke pours out in bursts. The potters form a line, passing pieces one by one. Cups, oil lamps, jugs shaped like birds, storage pots etched with protective symbols. Each piece is logged. Maker, size, clay blend, glazed type. One jug is labeled for Ishtar's temple, not to be used for soup again. You raise an eyebrow. Someone avoids your gaze. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian kilns were more communal or privately operated. In UR, it seems to be both, a shared space with fiercely individual pride. Each potter tweaks their clay, their firing time, their kiln charms. One man insists on whispering a short poem into each vessel before it goes in. Another sprinkles salt over the kiln mouth. Keeps the spirits from cracking your handles, he explains. A fringe theory suggests that some firing chants were meant not for the pottery, but for the fire itself, a kind of quiet bargaining with the element. You hear fragments today. Eat clean, burn hot, spare the necks. For the god of flame, I give you this finger cut. You don't ask questions. By midday, the kiln roars. The courtyard hums with nervous anticipation. Pottery firing is part science, part superstition, part gambling. Even the best pieces can warp, crack, or explode with a sound like an angry elephant. You record each stage, the loading, the sealing, the prayers, and sketch a few of the more elaborate designs. A bowl with fish carved into the rim, a jar shaped like a stylized cow, a very ambitious pitcher that looks suspiciously like the king. Lunch is a quick affair. Grilled onions on flatbread, water that tastes faintly of clay, and dried grapes so chewy you question your teeth's commitment. The potters eat in silence, watching the kiln. One nudges you. You ever see fire breathe sideways? You pretend you haven't. Afternoon brings the cool-down phase. The kiln is left to settle, the temperature dropping slowly. No one dares peek inside. The tension is almost religious. Some potters pace, others nap upright against walls. You continue logging stories. One potter tells you about the time he fired a set of wine cups for a merchant's wedding, and every single one melted. He offered the couple bowls instead. They divorced 3 weeks later. He now only makes oil lamps. By evening, the kiln is opened. The air grows thick with steam and anticipation. Carefully, one by one, the pieces are removed, each held up to the light, checked for cracks, praised or mourned. Most have survived. A few are warped. One jug seems to have developed a nose. You log it all. Tibaloo reads over your tablet, nods, and slaps your shoulder. Not bad for someone who's never pinched a coil. You smile. As you walk home under a sky just beginning to blush purple, you carry a small gift, an extra lamp with your name scratched into the base. It's slightly crooked, but then again, so are you. That night, you light the lamp. The flame flickers, steady and warm. You think about fire, not the raging kind, but the kind that bakes bowls and binds cities. The kind that doesn't destroy, but holds. And you sleep by its glow, surrounded by clay, stories, and just the faintest hint of salt in the air. Section 20. The morning begins with what can only be described as an ambush. Not by soldiers, not by roving goats, but by students. A gaggle of them, maybe 10 in all, swarming your door just after dawn with reed tablets, smudged fingers, and the kind of chaotic determination only young scribes in training can muster. We need help, one of them says. We're supposed to write an ode to the river, and half of us think the river is angry. You blink. You haven't even had breakfast. But before you can decline, they offer you a honey cake. You accept. This is how hostage situations begin. You agree to help. Today, it seems, is the Scribal Youth Festival, a lesser-known local holiday meant to encourage young learners and showcase the future of UR's literary greatness. It also serves as a day when most senior scribes mysteriously vanish to avoid babysitting duties. But not you. You're soft, and you've been bribed with baked goods. You lead the students to the shade of a fig tree near the temple courtyard and begin. Let's start with structure, you say. How many lines? Are we rhyming? Does the river have feelings or just moods? Blank stares. You sigh and begin drafting a sample. Oh, mighty Euphrates, brown and wide. You carry fish in boats with pride. You flood our fields. You kiss our toes. You smell like onions. But that's how it goes. The students giggle. One suggests adding a line about river spirits stealing sandals. Another insists the river once swallowed her uncle's hat. You encourage both. This is creative scribing, not tax math. As the day rolls on, the courtyard fills with other groups. Some reciting riddles, others acting out scenes from ancient myths, including one enthusiastic reenactment of a Nana descending into the underworld using only a ladder and dramatic facial expressions. You help a trio of shy students craft a playlet about a lonely pot who learns the value of teamwork. Another team performs a song titled, "Oh Clay, My Clay," which, despite its flat singing, earns a standing ovation from one proud grandmother. Historians still argue about how much children were involved in formal education in Mesopotamia. While Adaba schools existed, some believe festivals like this one were semi-public tests, where apprentices could show off and receive community blessings. Others argue they were thinly disguised child labor initiatives. Either way, the kids seem thrilled. A fringe tradition holds that winning students could present their work at the temple library, where a senior scribe would decide whether to copy it for official preservation. You are now, to these children, that scribe. No pressure. By mid-afternoon, you're presented with the final river ode, a glorious, slightly uneven, occasionally rhyming masterpiece that includes references to a talking fish named Mudface, the concept of emotional waves, a very long metaphor involving barley beer and sibling rivalry. You read it aloud with as much gravity as you can muster. The crowd cheers. A goat bleats supportively. You declare it fit for Nisaba herself. The students beam. To celebrate, you lead them in a final chant of "Let the styluses rise." Someone throws a tablet in the air. It breaks. No one cares. As the sun lowers, parents arrive to collect their scribal offspring. You're handed more honey cakes, 3 thank you notes, one with spelling errors, and a tiny clay figure of yourself holding a stylus and looking confused. You walk home full of pride, sugar, and the strange satisfaction that only comes from watching chaos turn into poetry. That night, you place the mini-you on your shelf, beside your goat lawsuit notes and your ceremonial anti-worm charm. And you fall asleep to the imagined voice of a river that sings about sandals and doesn't mind rhyming with toes. Section 21. You wake to the sound of distant horns and the unusual clatter of hooves, dozens of them. That's rarely a good sign. You peek out and spot what can only be described as a diplomatic parade, heading straight through the city gates with banners, gifts, and more animals than seems strictly necessary. News travels fast. A foreign king's emissary has arrived from the highlands, bearing tribute, traders, and crucially a complaint. The city is abuzz. Everyone suddenly cares about their tunics. Clay couriers are sprinting between temple and palace like startled beetles. You, naturally, are summoned to serve as protocol scribe for the delegation's visit. Your role: to document every gift, every phrase, and, ideally, to keep things from becoming an international incident over the misinterpretation of fine barley. You're handed a fresh tablet and herded toward the guest hall, a grand space with hanging reed mats, bronze fixtures, and a smell of crushed flowers unsuccessfully masking nervous sweat. The emissary is a tall man with a beard, so well-oiled it could qualify as a weapon. He bows once, offers the official greeting, and presents his first gift, a live leopard, draped in garlands and looking unimpressed. It yawns, revealing teeth that suggest it's reconsidering diplomacy. You log the offering as neutrally as possible. Next comes the complaint. Apparently, a shipment of Highland silver was lost en route through Sumerian territory. There's strong implication it was redirected, not misdelivered. The local priest assures the emissary that the gods must have had their reasons. The emissary responds with a smile that says, "I, too, have gods." You scribble. Peaceful exchange. No curses yet. Leopard remains calm. Historians still debate the real role of scribes in diplomacy, whether they were neutral record keepers or subtle manipulators of narrative. Today, you lean slightly toward the latter. The emissary's phrasing is careful, but so is yours. Gifts continue. Lapis from the mines, a carved idol of a mountain spirit, a fermented cheese that requires 2 men to carry. The local governor offers textiles in return, a set of religious tokens, and a recitation of 10 peaceful dreams someone had about goats. A fringe tradition holds that dream reports were used as soft political tools. If a dream foretold harmony, it was seen as divine approval. If it involved floods, teeth falling out, or fish that could talk, everyone went quiet and changed the topic. You note the dreams. As the visit continues, you're invited to a feast. Long tables of bread, onion stews, date wine, and ceremonial figs fill the guest hall. Toasts are exchanged, some more heartfelt than others. The leopard is thankfully tethered near the musicians, where it dozes through a flute solo. You sit near the emissary's second-in-command, who tells you, in careful Sumerian, that your city smells like victory in mud. You decide to take it as a compliment. Later, during the ceremonial gift exchange, you are asked to present the final offering, a tablet poem written by temple scribes in honor of the emissary's ruler. It praises his wisdom, beard, and strategic patience. You read it aloud in your best diplomatic voice. He claps once. Success. As the sun sets, the diplomats prepare to leave. The leopard is coaxed back into its cage with a fig stuffed with goat cheese. Parting words are exchanged, handclasps shared, and the promise of future trade, or at least fewer complaints, is made. You hand your finished tablet to the palace archivist. On your way home, you wonder how many leopards have stood in the same hall. How many scribes have written the same lines, nodding, smiling, quietly revising truth into something smoother than reality. That night, under a soft moon, and with the faint scent of ceremonial cheese still clinging to your sleeves, you drift to sleep dreaming of cats and crowns and peace sealed not by swords but by styluses. Section 22. You awake to find a chicken in your doorway again. It's the same one, you're almost sure, the one from your cousin's place who may or may not be spiritually involved in pantry mischief. It stares at you with that blank, plodding gaze unique to poultry and minor household deities. You sigh, shoo it off with your sandal, and begin your day. Today, you've been asked to help organize a funeral ritual. Not a grand royal affair. This is for a local baker, respected, mild-tempered, known for her fig cakes and her ability to recite barley prices by moon phase. Her family wants someone skilled with words to record and deliver the memory invocation. You accept because in Mesopotamia, even death must be properly archived. The ceremony begins at dusk. A slow procession leads from the baker's home to the edge of the city, where a small shrine to the underworld goddess Ereshkigal overlooks the fields. The mourners wear pale linen and carry offerings, jars of beer, honey cakes, woven tokens, and a small clay oven. You're told it was her favorite. You walk beside her eldest daughter, who tells you stories through tears, how her mother once won a citywide bake-off by substituting mashed lentils for dates, controversial, how she used to sing hymns to Demuzid while kneading dough, and how she never quite learned to whistle, but tried anyway every morning. You begin composing the eulogy as you walk. She baked warmth into stone. She fed strangers as though they were gods. Her loaves rose even in winter. At the shrine, the ritual begins. An offering fire is lit. Prayers are whispered. A priestess chants the names of protective spirits, meant to guide the dead through the 7 gates of the underworld. You step forward, tablet in hand, and read your invocation aloud. Your voice is steady. You don't rush. May her oven be warm in the halls of Ereshkigal. May her flour never clump. May she teach the dead how to toast sesame without burning it. There are tears. There's laughter. Someone places a single cinnamon stick at the base of the offering fire. The scent rises slowly, curling into the dusk. Historians still argue over how much of Mesopotamian funerary practice was symbolic versus literal. Did they really believe the dead baked in the afterlife? Maybe. Maybe not. But the imagery mattered. The care. The continuity. A fringe belief, mostly held by rural priests, said that good bakers were automatically granted safe passage through the underworld because anyone who could knead properly was clearly favored by the gods. You choose to believe this one. After the final blessing, the family buries her tablet, etched with her name, profession, and one of her favorite bread recipes, beneath a fig tree. They ask you to make a second copy for the temple archive. You do so gladly. As the mourners begin their walk home, you linger a moment by the shrine, watching the fire's last glow fade into ash. You think about legacy, not the kind etched in stone or shouted from ziggurats, but the kind passed in stories, in meals, in daily acts of kindness that somehow endure longer than monuments. That night, you place a lump of unused clay beside your sleeping mat, not to write on, just as a reminder that the hands which knead dough also shape time. Section 23. The following morning, you are as oddly quiet, not silent, just softer. Like the city itself is taking a long, slow breath. You step outside to find that the streets have been swept, the market stalls covered, and the ziggurat draped in lengths of clean linen fluttering gently in the breeze. Today is not a day for commerce or argument. Today is a day of remembering, a local tradition known simply as the Day of the Dust, when the people of UR pause to honor their ancestors, especially those whose names have been lost. You make your way to the central square, where dozens of small clay altars have been set up. Some are elaborate, decorated with polished stones and flowers. Others are just 3 bricks and a candle. But each one holds something meaningful: a shard of pottery, a broken necklace, a scrap of fabric, a carved name in fading cuneiform. You've been asked to help with the inscription tablets, small, palm-sized pieces of clay on which people can write a single word to commemorate a forgotten soul. You sit beneath a canopy and begin shaping clay with gentle fingers. People line up slowly, each offering a word. Mother, baker, watcher, did not finish the roof, always hummed that one song. You copy each one carefully. Some add tiny drawings: a cup, a sheep, a stylus, a fish. One boy asks you to draw a sun with teeth. You don't ask. You just do. Historians still argue whether this custom has roots in formal ancestor worship or is simply a grassroots response to the fragility of life in cities built of mud. Whatever its origins, it's deeply personal. There are no priests leading chants, no judges or tax collectors. Just memory, dust, and clay. A fringe tradition holds that on this day, the river forgets that the Euphrates deliberately pauses its flow for a moment to listen to the names carried on the wind. You stand near the water later and swear the ripples slow when someone whispers he liked dried figs. By midday, the square is full. The altars shimmer with heat. You help an old woman arrange 7 pebbles in a circle. "For the 7 sons I never had," she says, "but still dreamed about." You give her your seat. She sits quietly, hands folded, eyes closed. Later, a group of children reenact a short play about a lost merchant whose donkey becomes a philosopher in the afterlife. It's charming, barely rehearsed, and ends with everyone pretending to be reeds swaying in silence. You write it down. You end the day with your own tablet. 1 word, 1 drawing. You press your stylus gently into the clay and write, "Listener." Then you sketch a small mat, a stylus, and a crooked smile. You place it at the foot of a nameless altar and stand back, just as the sky turns that late evening gold that makes the city look like it's been dipped in honey and sleep. As you walk home, you feel something light, not joy exactly, but rightness, as though even those who have vanished still shape the road beneath your feet. That night, you sleep with your tablet hand curled near your chest, clay still under your nails, and the whispered names of strangers echoing in your dreams. Section 24. The air today is strange, cool, dry, and tinged with the scent of freshly cracked reeds and roasted sesame. You're already awake when the messenger arrives, this time not with a summons but an invitation. You're to accompany a small caravan leaving UR for the nearby countryside. The temple is dispatching a group of scribes, artisans, and officials to survey a newly discovered ruin, revealed after a recent flood reshaped a low bend of the Euphrates. They want you to help document whatever remains. You pack light, your stylus, extra clay, a water skin, and a pouch of dried lentil crackers that never go bad and never quite taste like food. You travel by donkey cart, the kind that insists on every pothole. Alongside you ride a potter, a junior priest who hums nervously, and a guard with the personality of overcooked barley. Conversation is sparse. The countryside rolls by. Fields of young barley, palm groves, herders waving lazily, the occasional bird so large it seems more myth than animal. By midday you arrive. The ruin is little more than a sunken courtyard, half-buried walls, exposed stone steps, and a scatter of broken pottery that glitters in the light like memory. But even at first glance you know this was once important. You step carefully, documenting each feature. A cracked mural here, showing what looks like a feast. A set of stairs leading nowhere. A half-intact inscription carved into a stone block that reads, "To the one who named the stars, we gave laughter." You pause. You copy it down. The team begins to clear debris. Beneath the mud are more tablets, some fused, some intact. A few are blank. One bears a name, in Lil Nasir, keeper of songs. You feel a chill. There's no temple to that title anymore. No mention in current lists. You sit near a half-collapsed basin and begin cataloging the pottery shards. Painted bowls, ceremonial cups, a tiny figurine of a musician holding what might be a lute or an oversized fish. It's hard to tell. You love it immediately. The priest beside you murmurs that this may have been a minor shrine to Nana, the moon god, or a forgotten sister deity. The glyphs are old, uncertain, maybe pre-standardization. You write everything down, including the guesses. Historians still debate whether these remote shrines were official or simply local faiths, personal gods worshipped by families, travelers, or craftsmen whose names never made it to temple records. This site seems to whisper from that edge. A fringe theory from a temple archivist suggests that many unknown ruins are actually sabbatical sites, places where city priests went to quietly lose their minds for a few weeks. You like that one. It explains the whimsical goat sculptures you're now sketching. As the day cools into evening, the team prepares to head back. You linger one moment longer at the edge of the ruins. The Euphrates gurgles nearby, reshaped again by time, always hiding or revealing. You bury a small, fresh tablet beneath a stone, just your name, the date, and a line from the old inscription. We gave laughter. Back in you return tired, sun-dazed and dust-streaked. You clean your stylus slowly, carefully. You dry the sketches. You think about the hands that once held those cups, those bowls, those forgotten songs. And as you lie down for the night, the silence of the open field still humming in your ears, you feel part of something very old, very quiet, and beautifully unfinished. Section 25. The final day begins with the hush of dawn pressing gently over you like a warm re-blanket. You wake slowly, not to shouting or chickens or ceremonial flutes, but to quiet. The city feels paused, as if the gods have taken their breath and decided, for now, not to demand, declare, or distribute any new errands. You stretch on your mat and stare at the thatched ceiling, watching dust drift in lazy spirals. You know what day it is. It's the Festival of Still Things, a local, almost private holiday. Not an official temple event, not widely attended, not spoken of in high halls. Just a quiet agreement passed down. One day a year, the scribes of UR put down their styluses. No writing, no math, no tablets, only stillness, memory, and breath. You dress simply and walk through the nearly empty streets. Shops are closed. Altars are quiet. Even the animals seem to understand. A cat watches you from a rooftop. It does not meow. You head to the ziggurat, not to enter, but to sit in its shadow. Others are there, silent. Some sit, some stand. No one speaks. A potter runs her fingers over a worn bowl. A child traces cuneiform letters in the dust, only to gently brush them away. You pull from your sash your one allowed object, a blank tablet, smooth, soft, untouched. It rests in your lap as you sit cross-legged, your hands hovering but never pressing. Today, it's not for carving. It's for holding, for remembering the shape of unspoken things. You think of Ashoka and his elephants, of temple kitchens and ceremonial cheeses, of lawsuits about goats and dialogues with sarcastic livestock. You think of every name you've written, every moment captured in clay, and how, even now, the most powerful lines are the ones you never quite finished. The sun rises. The day glides by. Meals are eaten in silence. Laughter is quiet, shared with looks, not voices. And when evening comes, you return to your small home. You place the blank tablet on your shelf, beside your collection of charms, jokes, and festival scribbles. It belongs. You lie down on your mat. The city slows, and you begin to drift. Wind down 300 words. So now, with the city quiet and the stars gently blooming above the rooftops of UR, let's slow everything down. Let your breathing soften. Let your shoulders fall. You're no longer a scribe, or a worker, or a dreamer wrapped in fig leaves and fish stories. You're simply here. Now. The clay is cooled. The stylus is still. Somewhere, a breeze stirs the reeds. Somewhere, a priest yawns and decides even the gods can wait until morning. You imagine the river flowing far beyond your doorstep, unchanged, eternal, patient. And in its current, bits of yesterday's bread, drops of perfume, and fragments of laughter from a festival long past all drift together like sediment of memory. You did good work. You wrote the days as they came, without fanfare, without erasure. You kept track of goats and kings, of dreams and dust, and made sense, gentle, crooked sense, of a world that never quite asked to be recorded. Now your mat is warm. Your breath is easy. The walls are strong. Sleep is coming on soft feet, like a temple cat. It will sit beside you. It will not ask questions. So let go. Let go of the barley counts. Let go of the river jokes. Let go of the goat lawsuits and the sacred cheese. Let them fall from your thoughts like dust from sandals. You're safe here. You're home. And the stories will wait. They always do.